Well, hast gwahalt trumne to do with squiliet squest, chines sailors and skolse and kulam chump kanehu. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for an important discussion today on the impact of tribal enterprises on regional businesses and economies. My name is Casey Lozar, and I'm Vice President at the Minneapolis Fed, and I have the honor of serving as the Director of the Center for Indian Country Development. I'm also an enrolled member of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes here in Montana. I'm thrilled to welcome you to the webinar today. We have a great lineup of speakers and presenters who will explore data, research, and insight into two key economic drivers in Indian country: Indian gaming and federal contracting. Together, this research and our panelists' contributions provide a more complete story about the interconnection of tribal and non-tribal economies. But first, I'd like to acknowledge that many of the center staff do their work on the traditional homelands of the Dakota, Oyate, Ojibwe, and other indigenous peoples. And we acknowledge the critical contributions of many other indigenous peoples and Native nations in CICD's work. We do this to reaffirm CICD's commitment to advancing the economic self-determination and prosperity of Native nations through engagement with indigenous governments, communities, businesses, and organizations. And I think this is a perfect way to start today's webinar and our conversation. See, place can connect communities and economies. And in today's webinar, you'll see a theme of connection and success through geographic or place-based business development. I grew up on the Flathead Indian Reservation here in Western Montana, and I've had the opportunity to serve on multiple tribal enterprise boards. And in a board capacity and as a community member, I have witnessed firsthand the symbiotic relationship between tribally owned enterprises and the local and regional economies. In particular, I've had the opportunity to see SNK Electronics, a Confederate Salish and Kootenai tribes federal contracting and manufacturing firm, employ hundreds of Native and non-Native professionals over the years. SNK Electronics engagement in community includes supporting local charitable events and a really important partnership with our local tribal college, Salish Kootenai College. I've seen how the enterprise partners with major defense prime contractors on building wire harnesses and circuit boards for military equipment, or how they subcontract work to non-Native businesses located in the valley just north of the reservation. SNK Electronics' success has impacts for our tribal community, our neighboring businesses and economies, and really ensures the United States has reliable, high-quality electronic components for our military. Major contributions for a local manufacturing firm, contributions whose reach isn't often fully understood. As you learn today about new research available from the Center for Indian Country Development, or CICD, I encourage you to consider how this research can be a resource for analyzing your own community's economic interconnections and those impacts beyond our tribal economies. Today's first two presenters, Elliot Charette and Jacqui Baldwin-LeClair, are two of our CICD professionals who are passionate about data-driven research and exploring opportunities and trends with regard to the effect and the impact and the success of Indian country economies. Elliot serves as CICD's Senior Research Assistant and will provide us with research into the economic spillover created by tribally owned casinos located on federally recognized Indian reservations. And then Jacqui, a project manager who leads CICD's federal contracting portfolio, will delve into research analyzing the contributions of Native entity-owned enterprises to their local and regional economies. There will be a Q&A portion of today's webinar, so if you have any questions for our speakers, please use the Q&A function on the Zoom platform. Now with that, it is my pleasure to hand it over to our first presenter, Elliot Charette.
Thanks, Casey, for that introduction to some of the research that I'm going to be talking about today. My name is Elliot Charette, and I conduct research at the Center for Indian Country Development. Today, I will discuss some of the main findings from our research project that quantifies tribal gaming spillovers. The full paper can be found at the Center for Indian Country Development's website and is co-authored by Matthew Gregg, who is a senior economist here at the center, and Alice Shang, who is an economist at the International Monetary Fund. So the views expressed here are those of the presenters and not necessarily those of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis or the Federal Reserve System. So the goal of this research project is to quantify the extent of agglomeration spillovers created by tribal casinos. Agglomeration spillovers is a term used to describe when a business, in our case, tribally owned casinos, not only bring foot traffic to themselves, but also draw visitors to nearby businesses. We know that tribally owned gaming operations generate large direct economic impacts in the form of revenue generation and job creation. For example, in 2023, 245 federally recognized tribes owned and operated 527 gaming operations, which generated about $42 billion in revenue. We also know that tribes contribute broadly to local and regional economies from the work by consultants through economic impact studies. However, we know less about the causal effects of the specific large-scale investments. We aim to contribute, hopefully, to a growing field of research that helps identify the economic impact of specific tribal policies or investments. So identifying agglomeration spillovers is of both practical and theoretical interest. For tribal policymakers, they should know how local investments affect the community they serve. Yet, the impact of local investments is theoretically unclear. Theory posits that local investments can benefit neighboring businesses from agglomeration spillovers. For example, if tribal casinos serve as regional hubs for economic activity, nearby businesses will benefit more from locating closer to a casino than further away. However, customers may substitute spending at a business closest to a casino for spending elsewhere. In this case, agglomeration spillovers may be offset by what the literature refers to as the agglomeration shadow. Despite the theoretical and policy significance, there is little empirical research to causally identify agglomeration spillovers in rural communities or tribal communities. We need both data and good research design to estimate spillovers created by tribal casinos. In our research, we exploit the staggered reopening of tribal casinos on federally recognized reservations during the COVID-19 pandemic as a natural experiment to identify how tribal casinos affect neighboring businesses. As many of you may know, the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, which was signed in 1988, granted and affirmed the authority of tribal governments to own and operate casinos. As a result, tribes decided when their casinos would reopen once shelter-in-place orders were relaxed. Because tribal casinos reopened at different times across Indian country, this allows us to compare consumer activity at businesses located near a casino that reopened to consumer activity at businesses located near a casino that had yet to reopen. We use high-frequency data, cell phone location data that tracks foot traffic to specific business establishments. This allows us to measure the number of weekly visitors to businesses between March and December 2020. This time frame encompasses the periods of closing and reopening of many tribal casinos. Because tribal casinos reopened on a week-by-week basis, we need to use alternative and high-frequency data, such as weekly foot traffic data. Adult cell phone users opt in to being tracked, and by our calculation, roughly 8% of the adult population living in our counties within our sample were tracked. Basically, that's a large sample. We first measured the spillover estimates on all businesses located between 0 and 3 miles away from a casino. While not shown, after 3 miles, the spillover estimates bounce around and are likely influenced by factors unrelated to casinos. After a casino reopened, we estimate an almost 200% increase in the number of visitors to businesses located within 1/2 mile of a casino. That is equivalent to a 3-fold increase or 3 times increase in visitors. As we move away from a casino, the spillover effects remain positive and economically meaningful until we reach 1.5 miles from a casino. The largest beneficiaries were businesses in the leisure and hospitality sectors. After 1.5 miles, businesses saw either no change in visitor counts or fewer visitors. The decline in visitors is largely concentrated in the retail business sector. Yet, when we look at the entire 3-mile radius around a casino, the average business saw an increase in visitors by about 11% after a casino reopened. Our research design allows us to estimate the dynamic effects of a casino reopening, but only for 10 weeks prior to and 10 weeks after a casino reopened. The reason for that is when a casino reopened, the nearby businesses are no longer in our comparison group. The blue line in this figure shows the difference in visitor counts in percent terms between hospitality businesses near casinos that reopened versus hospitality businesses near casinos that remain closed. There are 3 main takeaways from this figure, which are highlighted in the text inside the figure. The first takeaway is in the weeks well before a casino reopened, visitor counts in hospitality businesses near soon-to-be reopened casinos and visitor counts in hospitality businesses near casinos that were not planning to reopen shared similar trends. So that's this area on the figure here. The second takeaway is in the week before a casino reopened, we see a small increase in visitors in hospitality businesses near soon-to-be reopened casinos. That's this area here. This could be due to casino employees who returned to the casino prior to reopening. We think this could be a result because we see a small effect at the casinos themselves. Our final result, which is essentially everything to the right of this bar here, of this vertical dash line, or this vertical line, is we see a permanent increase in visitors to hospitality businesses during the first 10 weeks after a casino reopened. Our last figure shows how tribal investments impact economies beyond tribal boundaries. We analyze the effect of casino reopening on off-reservation businesses located within 1.5 miles away from a casino. I am going to describe each one of these bars shown in the figure. We find that the average off-reservation business saw an increase in visitors by 33% when a nearby casino reopened. That's shown here in the first bar. We also find that off-reservation businesses, except for those in the hospitality sector, saw an increase in visitors by 19%. That's the second bar here. And lastly, the largest and most robust impact occurred among off-reservation hospitality businesses. We estimate that on average, off-reservation businesses saw off-reservation hospitality businesses, which are hotels and restaurants, saw an increase in visitors by about 40%. Our findings on agglomeration spillovers from tribal casinos have important policy implications. We'll focus on just one implication here. Our results inform resource allocation and government revenue administration. In Indian country, tribal and state governments often have overlapping tax authority on the same businesses or activities. Without state tribal tax compacts, states and tribes have the legal jurisdiction to tax the same economic activity twice, which impedes economic development. Our findings show that large-scale tribal investments, such as Indian casinos, on reservations could be a catalyst for regional economic development, thereby generating a positive externality for off-reservation establishments. This interconnectedness provides additional rationale and incentives for closer economic cooperation between tribal and state governments. For more information about our paper, the methodology, threats to identification, and additional results, please see our working paper, which is on the Center for Indian Country Development's website. And with that, I will pass it to Jacqui, who will talk about Native entities and federal contracting. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm Jacqui Baldwin-LeClair. I'm a program manager with the Center for Indian Country Development, and I am in charge of the federal contracting portfolio. I'm excited to discuss today with you our research on subcontracting under Native entity-owned enterprises. But I do want to first acknowledge that this work was not me alone. I want to acknowledge Ava LaPlante, who is a research assistant with CICD and primary author in this research. Without her skills and her research, none of this presentation or this work would have been possible. Another disclaimer that the views expressed here are the presenters and not necessarily those of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis or the Federal Reserve System. So looking at the high level, why are we focusing on federal contracting and CICD? We work with stakeholders, and a number of years ago, we heard that federal contracting was a growing source of economic opportunity for Native entity enterprises. And Native entity enterprises are the businesses owned by Native entities, and those are Alaskan Native corporations, Native Hawaiian organizations, and tribes. And so our work began several years ago looking at small business administration data that included tribally owned enterprises in the 8A program. We were able to connect the enterprise to the contracts and look at the different trends. From those trends, we saw that there was a large and growing revenue source of Native entity enterprises in federal contracting, and that it was an important driver of economic activity, sometimes on, but in most cases, contracts occurring off of Native land areas. And finally, we just wanted to understand what are the trends and what does this mean for economic development overall. So I would encourage you, if you're curious about our past research, we have this growing body library of research on federal contracting that is the landscape and the foundation of what we will talk about today, which is subcontracting, a subset of some of the different research that we have in federal contracting. But really diving back in and looking specifically into subcontracting, we're really exploring what is the connection or interconnection between these Native entity enterprises and their small business subcontractors. And through our research, we found that there was a strong relationship between Native entity enterprises and small business subcontractors, especially those that were non-Native in type. So talking about the data that we created for this analysis, we used usaspending.gov and via an API data pull just due to the sheer number of contracts that were in this data set. This is raw data from the government, and so we had to do a lot of work to understand the data and to make sure that it was reliable. It's not prepackaged data from any entity that has already gone through it. And from that, you'll see in our article that there's some information about how we did our analysis and how we specifically organized the data itself. So what we did is we looked at the prime and subcontracting data that was performed and done between October of 2015 and October of 2023. We identified these dates because prior to 2015, there were some looser regulations in the way that subcontracting was reported. We found that after 2015, the data was more reliable, and we were able to study it and find those trends. We also limited the contracts that we looked at to those Native entity enterprises, those owned by Alaskan Native corporations, Native Hawaiian organizations, and tribally owned enterprises owned by tribes. And so this allowed us to look at the relationship between those entities themselves as they registered through the different federal contracting programs to the small businesses. We then reviewed the small business subcontracting engaged by Native entity enterprises under their prime contracts. And so these are businesses that register with the Small Business Administration. And we chose these programs that are listed here on the screen because it provides additional information about the business type. When these businesses register as either a small disadvantaged business or in the 8A program, a women's owned business or veterans owned business, they're providing information additionally about the character of their business. They could qualify as more than one of these different entities. And so that was helpful to see where are Native entities contracting and then who are they contracting with. I do want to flag the definition of small business in federal contracting is slightly different than the generic definition, which is fewer than 500 employees. I would encourage you, if you're curious about this, to look at the industry classification, but sometimes it could be more than 500 employees, or it could be gross annual receipts anywhere from 2.2 million to 47 million. And so this is a different characteristic in federal contracting. But really diving into our research questions, the first one we wanted to ask, what are the type of businesses that are contracting with Native entity enterprises and who are they subcontracting to? And we found that Native entity-owned prime contractors most frequently contracted to small disadvantaged businesses and non-program affiliated businesses. From our analysis, we estimate that 71% of the total obligated prime contracts to Native entity enterprises were awarded to small business subcontractors in 2002. And from this estimate, we found that 16.6 billion on the prime contract awards, of that 1.2 billion went to small business subcontractors. Another key finding was that 92.9% of the total small businesses subcontracted in our data set were not registered as Native-owned businesses. So that is, they were not Native individually owned or Native entity owned. And as you can see in the figure, breaking this down further, what our findings were, we looked at the different characteristics of the business types of the businesses. This figure shows the percentages of the small business subcontracted by their business type. You'll note that it adds up to more than 100 because it's showing the percentage of these businesses to comparing it to the prime contracts. And some businesses can have multiple characteristics. And finally, we wanted to understand and explore the geographic connections of small business subcontractors to the location of their contract place of performance. From past research, we know that the majority of government contracts that Native entities were performing or were working on were outside of Native land areas or out of reservation boundaries. And so under the federal acquisition rules, place of performance is the majority place where the work is to be performed, or in the case of manufacturing or an acquisition of goods, the place where the goods will be delivered. Figure 2 here shows the distance between the place of performance, where the contract is deemed to be performed, and the subcontractor's city of record on their business. We looked at a wide area of 250 miles to define as local, which may seem large, but looking at the rules for some federal contracting local classifications, it was more expansive. We used the bona fide place of business rule, which is, while it's currently suspended, may come back in 2025, and we use that as a basis to adopt a mile limitation to figure out what could be local and what are businesses maybe working on a large scale contract. And so here we found in construction that with that 250-mile limit, that the 75.9% of construction contracts subcontracted to small businesses were local within that period, and 48.4% of professional business services was considered local as well. And finally, with manufacturing, 23.5%. And we understand manufacturing may happen off-site, but these are the 3 biggest industries that Native entity enterprises contract in the large super sectors. And so we really wanted to understand what was that connection and understand how they relate to the local community. So I hope our research and presentation today gave you more insight into one aspect of federal contracting and looking at the interconnectedness between Native entity enterprises and small businesses. If you want to learn more, there's additional details and facts and analysis in our article, which is available on minneapolisfed.org under CICD. I will pass it back to Casey.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jacqui. Those were insightful presentations on kind of the far-reaching impacts of tribal enterprises. And, while Jacqui and Elliot each shared about 20 minutes of their team's research this afternoon, I'm just always impressed and in awe of the volume of work and data cleaning and harmonization and the deep analysis that goes into each one of these analytical projects. So for that, I just want to thank you and your teams for the important contributions to the field of Indian country economic development. We're gonna switch gears a little bit and dive a little bit deeper into a discussion on this research by tapping into the years of experience and expertise of a couple national leaders who have spent their careers growing tribal businesses or analyzing their influence in our communities. And I just want to remind everyone that you can add your questions for both our panelists and our presenters using the Q&A box or the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Our first panelist or discussant is Randall Akee. Randy is an associate professor in American Indian Studies at UCLA, where he also serves as the department chair. Randy brings to our conversation a wealth of experience and knowledge concerning economic research in Indian country. And our second panelist, Trillina Scott. Trillina is Cherokee Nation Business's chief economist with over 20 years of experience working both with the Cherokee Nation and with Cherokee Nation businesses. Prior to her role as chief economist, she also served as treasurer and chief financial officer for the Cherokee Nation. And I will note that both Randy and Trelina have ties to the Federal Reserve and the Center for Indian Country Development. Randy is a past member of the CICD Leadership Council and recently served as a CICD Research Fellow. And Trelina joined the CICD's Leadership Council earlier this year and has already made some quick and important contributions to the council. And you can find links to their bios in the chat. So just jumping right in, Randy and Trelina, the title of today's webinar is Economic Impact Beyond Tribal Economies. And we just heard about research exploring two key examples where tribal economies may be more interconnected to surrounding local economies. So happy for any one of you to jump in right away. And really the first question that I had is, when you think about this research, what do you see as the common threads in the two presentations and the common threads in the findings that the team presented today? And why are these findings important in better understanding tribal economies?
So some of the commonality that I see between both is really the spillover effect, and the fact that it's not spillover strictly to Native-owned businesses or Native citizens. It's really a spillover effect to a variety of business owners and people alike. Really, this study shows that when tribes do well, everyone around them does well too. The states do well, the citizens, both tribal and non-tribal alike, do well. Another piece that I find interesting through my experience is that a lot of times the federal contracting practice that the tribes have is actually a spillover effect of the gaming practices that they've had. Cherokee Nation being one of those examples. We started in gaming long before we started in federal contracting. And when we decided to enter into the federal contracting realm, we actually leveraged our cash flows from our gaming operations to support the setup of our federal contracting practice. We started in the gaming industry. Cherokee Nation, when I say we, I mean Cherokee Nation, started in the gaming industry, I'd say strongly in the very early 90s, shortly after IGRA was passed. But we didn't start into the federal contracting realm until about 2010. We were one of the later tribes to get into that. Well, I say that there's a lot of tribes who still have the opportunities to get into that, and I think that would be a good diversification plan. And that's why the Cherokee Nation did it. It was for diversification of our revenues. So in some ways, you can say that the gaming spillover, federal contracting can be a result of gaming spillover as well.
Trelina, thank you for making that connection. I mean, not only to sort of the important influence that tribal enterprises have beyond tribal communities, but the interplay between a nation's own tribal enterprises and sort of that the building of success over time and the diversification of success over time. And that diversification of tribal tribal enterprises certainly has a positive impact beyond tribal borders. So I appreciate that. Randy, how about you? Common threads from this research and its findings, and why is this important to understanding tribal economies?
Yeah, it's incredibly important and incredibly impressive, the work that's been done and continues to operate, be conducted at CICD. We've had some work in the past by researchers like Catherine Spildy and Jonathan Taylor, who've looked at sort of the impact of tribal gaming on unemployment in these concentric circles around gaming facilities, 5 miles away, 10 miles away, 20 miles away. And, this really useful, impactful sort of, the correlations primarily, but still, again, very informative, about 20 years ago. And what I see here is the sort of evolution of that type of research on impact. And I think, Casey, you mentioned it a little bit earlier that, you're impressed by the amount of work that goes into the data collection, cleaning, linkage. And that, I think, is the kind of thing that both of these studies are able to achieve. You see the evolution of the quantitative analysis that can be done with the partnership of innovative data sets, administrative data sets, novelties like Elliott's research, which looks at cell phone traffic data, right? A type of data that most of us have no idea about, or have, some of us have used it, some of us have no idea about. But it informs us especially in communities that are relatively small, relatively not sort of connected in the sense of national data sets and national representation in data sets. And so these are some of the important things that I think are important, so that we can see ourselves and see our communities and our economies in the national picture and start to assert ourselves in these discussions. Because I think the thing coming out, the point coming out from this is that these are players economically, strategically, financially, in various ways. And here we're measuring two broad industries, but guess what? There's a bunch more, right? There's natural resources. There's employment in the health industries that we have just barely scratched the surface of. So I think there are these other areas. And again, we have to start somewhere. And I think this is the way to think about it.
Randy, maybe a follow-up on that point about sort of, today we're talking about tribal gaming and we're talking about federal contracting. You just introduced a few other areas. I'm just curious if you can maybe speak to some of those other areas where you've seen that there has been positive impact or positive outcomes from other types of tribal enterprises that have helped shape local and regional economies.
I mean, I don't think we have tons of research on it. That's the downside. I think that's ripe for researchers, hopefully, who are sitting in the audience and their colleagues and other agencies to explore it. But I think, of course, one of the most glaring examples are in healthcare and health access and facilities, and the innovation that tribes themselves are doing by investing, as Cherokee and many other nations are, in their own health facilities, right? Sort of augmenting that above and beyond what the federal government has provided or other agencies have provided on their own terms for their own people in their own ways. So I think those types of innovations are things we barely have a knowledge that we've quantified in a sort of social science way to show the impact. But I think those, to me, from everything I know and all of the innovations and resiliency that I know about in various communities, I think those are the places that we could see a lot of positive spillovers.
Excellent. And Joanna, just thinking about your work and your time and as a leader at Cherokee Nation and seeing sort of the evolution and diversification of tribal nation businesses, what are some of the other examples of enterprises that you think are really helping to shape the economies that are sort of surrounding Cherokee Nation?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. As you were talking about that, there's quantitative analysis that we can do that's very simple, and then there's some impacts that are less easily calculated, but absolutely is just as important. And like you mentioned, the healthcare, I think increased healthcare, also increased education, the social assistance. And, speaking from the way that the Cherokee Nation operates, is that our businesses and our government are a bit separate. I mean, there's obviously oversight and everything, but our dividends from the businesses go back to the nation for the nation to provide those essential government functions and services to the citizens. And like Randall touched on, our healthcare, we've made significant, hundreds of millions of dollars of investment in building our own hospitals. Currently, there's a hospital under construction right now, a $400 million hospital under construction. And back in around 2019, we opened a very large outpatient facility at our national headquarters in Tahlequah. And we also have 10 clinics that go along with those throughout our reservation. So you can absolutely see the increase in our healthcare and our health outcomes from that. Other things that are a little less quantifiable are impacts back to education and providing scholarships to citizens for higher education. I'm a product of that myself. I received a scholarship. I went off to college, and then I came home and I worked for the tribe, which is, I think, kind of the goal of the entire program, is to send our citizens off and get them well educated and bring them back home to work and do great things. Not only for the tribe, but for the state, just the region in general. So, those things are much less quantifiable, although as absolutely as important as, the other spillover effects with the multipliers and everything that we can put hard data around.
Yeah. I hear often tribal leaders talking about, the importance of building up healthcare facilities to serve our relatives, right? But it's also growing to be an enterprise that is also serving other non-natives as well. And I know that there's a lot of interest of understanding sort of the role that tribes play in the healthcare system within sort of broader regions. And I think I'm just marking that as a interesting question to explore from an economic research perspective. Both Randy and Trelina, you guys are, because you're connected to the center, you're aware that our mission is to advance economic self-determination, and we do that through data and research. But we do that all with the focus on trying to contribute to not only deepen understanding of tribal economies, but to contribute to public policy. So I'm hoping that you can speak a little bit to, so how can research projects like the ones we're discussing right now help inform the decision-making processes for policymakers, tribal governments, tribal practitioners, thinking about elected leaders in state houses or even in Washington, D.C.? And how can this research be leveraged to inform public policy?
Well, I'll just jump in really quickly and sort of take off on something that actually Elliot had mentioned a bit earlier in his presentation too, this idea of double taxation. That's a policy choice. That's a choice that's made there. And if you can show conclusively, and I think, some of Elliot's work and Jacqui's work is showing that there are these positive externality benefits to off-reservation, non-native potential communities, governments, citizens from having economic development in native nations. There's an argument for taking away this double taxation, right? So that is the kind of thing that could be spurred. That's the kind of change that I can see, this really being the mounting evidence for the repeal of that, or the rescinding of that type of policy that we know hinders economic growth and development in many native communities.
I echo everything that was just said. One of my former roles at the Cherokee Nation was director of corporate tax, and I saw firsthand very clearly what the burdens of the double taxation are on tribes, and even those taxes that we can pass on to the consumer, right, is still a burden for economic development. In many cases, this leads to the tribes foregoing their own tax ability in lieu of the growth that's available. But I cannot stress enough how these types of studies, there's a long history of legal battles that can show that states and tribes don't always play nice together. But when we can have research like this that gives very just data analysis, I'll say emotionless studies that show the true impact of tribes across the nation, wherever they may be located, those can be taken to the policymakers for a variety of laws. It's not just tax, but it's everything that's done within the state. And it shows that states and tribes, if they worked together, could have such a greater impact than working against each other. It's not our piece of the pie, your piece of the pie. It's the whole pie that we need to be looking at. And these types of studies inform those lawmakers who can have skewed opinions sometimes, or a lack of full understanding of the impact of the tribes. I think these and economic impact studies are invaluable. In fact, the Cherokee Nation does an economic impact study, and we print these out and we send them with our government relations folks up to the Capitol, both state and federal, when they're speaking with lawmakers on various policies, just to show the true impact.
Excellent. Earlier we talked about common threads between those two pieces of research. I think what I just heard is the power of research and data analysis to create common ground for discussion among policymakers between Indian country and outside Indian country and beyond. So appreciate those perspectives. I did just want to remind the group, the audience, to send in your questions. You can use the Q&A button for any of our speakers or our panelists. Before we kind of open it up to Q&A, I did want to kind of go back to and maybe push the conversation a little bit deeper with regard to sort of the other areas where tribes are making inroads with their tribal enterprises and make that connection to research. We talked a little bit about healthcare, certainly some conversation or a mention of natural resources. And I'm just curious, knowing who the audience is, what are some of those unanswered research questions that the field should be exploring to continue to deepen understanding of the influence of tribal economies?
I would look at, as was mentioned, unemployment, but there's other data sets such as life expectancy, anywhere in there that can be shown, because to have a fully developed economy, it's not only jobs and income, it's all those ancillary things, school systems, healthcare, and all the other services that are there. So I would look at test data at schools, elementary through higher education. I would look at that, like I said, the healthcare outcomes and a lot of those social services. The increase in social services provided through the tribes would be another great place to look. Housing, the Cherokee Nation has a huge housing program, which is funded in part by the businesses to help people with home ownership and moving through that. And as we know, that's one of the greatest builders of wealth for a person. So,
thanks, Julia.
So I would just add to, again, the sort of the broad category of the environment and natural resources. Again, I think there are places where the sort of environmental sort of mitigation strategies that tribal nations, indigenous peoples are undertaking are at the forefront and may lead the industry for, sort of adverse impact in environmental climate change as an industry. We don't think of it as an industry probably too much, but I think there are lots of innovations that are going on in indigenous communities in various places, indigenous and tribal economic knowledge, for instance, right? Ecological knowledge. I mean, the other area is in the valuation of ecosystem services, where we have lots of services that ecosystems provide to us that are not based on the market. We don't buy and sell certain things. In certain communities, it's salmon. In certain communities, it's wild rice. In certain communities, it's other shore-lined resources, or it's deer. Those are all products of the ecosystem. Without a method of us as indigenous peoples evaluating that on a cost-benefit analysis, the cost to developing that parcel of land or that valley or that resource, the water table, for instance, it's zero. But in reality, it has a cost, and it has a cost to people who survive there. So that's an entire area that doesn't show up on on ledgers anywhere because, again, it's part of an indigenous economy. And so that's an entire area that gets overlooked in the standard set of analyses. But again, I sort of wrap it under this entire sort of environmental, natural resource economies heading that I think really matters. And I think it's, again, a way and a place in which indigenous peoples have led the way for thousands of years and have a knowledge deeply of all these different ecosystems, right, from the Arctic to the tropics.
Excellent. Well, I want to bring in Elliot and Jacqui as well to join Trilina and Randy for kind of the Q&A part of today's webinar. And it looks like we're getting a number of different questions. And maybe wanted to start with Scott's question. He has a question about how supportive are tribes of entrepreneurialism for tribal members. And I think embedded in that question is, what is the role of tribal government supporting entrepreneurs and their impact in supporting the broader tribal economies? So this question is open to anyone who'd like to take it. How supportive of our tribes of entrepreneurialism for tribal members?
I can jump into that one. That one's one that's near and dear to my heart, actually, because we are currently accepting applications for our second cohort of Native women-owned businesses to receive tribal support. They get a $10,000 grant and a 12-week course in partnership with the University of Tulsa to really bring in experts and teach them, a multitude of foundations of growing a business. I believe this was the first program of its type in the nation, and we're really proud. Last year we got to do 5 individuals, and we had well over 100 applications. This year we're moving that up to 10 individuals. So that's an investment right there. Again, working with partnerships. It's all about partnerships, right? It's a partnership with the University of Tulsa and some folks there. But we also have the Small Business Center, the Cherokee Nation Small Business Center, which provides mentorships, provides working spaces. It provides some financing. We have a CIC that provides some financing, but more it's the helping and the coaching that we have through the Small Business Center, and loans and such are ancillary to that. But I would say that the Cherokee Nation is not unique in this either. I know that several other tribes just here in Oklahoma have very similar services that they offer, again, because the Cherokee Nation does not do everything on its own. The number of our vendors is enormous. So we have to look to those small businesses to help provide, the goods and services that we need. And we actually have a law. It's called the TARO law, Tribal Employment. Terrible way acronym, sorry. But anyway, we have a law that, like, when we are using vendors, if there's a TARO certified vendor, that we use them first. It's only when we don't have a vendor, capable for whatever goods and services that we go outside of that. So growing our Native-owned small businesses is tremendously important for the tribes, I would say.
Excellent.
And I can jump in here, Casey, too, and talk about how it's tied to subcontracting. So we know in federal contracting that the market is becoming more consolidated. Both larger contracts are being awarded to bigger companies, and it's harder for some small businesses to compete, which is why we wanted to look at that subcontracting connection. And so subcontracting by Native Entity Enterprise, we see those small businesses getting an opportunity to get experience, which is necessary to acquire those larger contracts. And so it really ties back to the way that they're helping those either local businesses or small businesses that they work with build up their work and their record of showing that they can serve federal government contracts, and also building that business so that they have this revenue through the subcontract. And so they're able to continue to grow their business in their communities.
Excellent. Excellent. Maybe another question that came in, kind of focused on federal contracting from Christina. For tribal businesses engaged in federal contracting, are there enterprises, are they also diversifying to contract with commercial businesses? And are there any steps that regional economic development partners could take to facilitate these business partnerships?
is the question, I'm sorry, I may not be understanding the question correctly. Is it that, are we partnering with commercial businesses?
Yeah, is there a growing trend in partnering with commercial operations? And maybe that's kind of what we're seeing in some of the subcontracting analysis, right? Is that maybe the private commercial businesses are not federal contractors themselves, but they're getting the opportunity to sort of enter that field through opportunities to earn subcontracts through some of the native entity primes. So in fact, that is happening, and I think at the basis of the question is kind of how do you find those partners? How do you find those areas of expertise? I don't know if you all have any sort of lived experiences of making those connections between vendors and small businesses that can assist you in meeting your contractual obligations.
Yeah, absolutely. Cherokee Nation takes the approach that, we're the prime on the contract. And that means that when we win the prime, that means we obviously have the expertise and everything needed for the performance of that contract. Where there are some very specific expertise gaps, if you will, that we need to be filled, we always take the approach of the best athlete type approach, right? So we're really just looking for the best subcontractor to fill that need, regardless of that subcontractor's status, if you will. So because at the end of the day, when that contract is evaluated by the contracting officer, it's our performance that's sort of on the line. So we want the best partners available to help us perform well on the prime contract. So, and then over time, we develop relationships with those subcontractors based on past performance. And, once we have a stable full of subcontractors that we know work well, we tend to gravitate back towards them. But obviously always open for new businesses in the sector that are doing well and can help us perform on the prime contract.
Excellent. That's helpful insights. And maybe turn into to Randy and perhaps Elliot, thinking about a little bit of the benefits of research. What do you see as the benefit of researchers measuring the causal effect of some of these large tribal enterprise investments?
Again, I think the benefit of having the causal impact is that when tribal leaders and other policymakers need to advocate on behalf of investing in industry A versus industry B or opportunity A or opportunity B, having some definitive numbers on the return to the investment in those different industries, helps to make decisions based on evidence. And so, I think the more research we have across the board, again, whether it's health, environment, education, housing development, contracting, the more information tribal leaders have to make better and more informed decisions on where to best allocate their limited resources in order to, better their communities, better their tribal nations. So, and I think the impact of causal versus correlational analysis is the distinction that should really be made here. Correlations are the way we've done analysis for a long time because it's really hard to get causal impacts. But I think, with advances in the kind of data that we have and the longevity, the sort of longitudinal panels of data and analysis that is potentially possible, we can start to get at some of those causal mechanisms as opposed to just, when this goes up, that also goes up. And that's sort of been the hallmark of some of our previous decision making. So I think that's really the impact that we want, or the direction we hope to see things going. And I think CICD, you guys are doing a great job there. So for those of us who are on the outside, thank you for doing that kind of work, because it's a heavy lift. It's a heavy lift to get data, to do the analysis, to do it right, and to put it out there in a format that is also digestible and usable by the policy world, by the advocacy world, because it shouldn't all be just academic speak, which those of us in academia can get, pigeonholed and stuck in. So pushing people like me and others to engage in this way, I think is an important way forward for all of us collectively, because I think we all want to be able to speak to each other about these same topics. Also, I'll just say as I stop, I also think it's really important for practitioners and people working like Chelina and others to tell us what you think we should be doing and where their opportunities for research are, that, hey, nobody's looked at X, nobody's looked at Y. Because if we have students, if we have researchers, but also at CICD, I'm saying as well, because we need some of that insight that there's an area that is ripe for work. It happens to be in the Southeast. It happens to be in the Northwest. It happens to be on this topic or that topic. That would be quite useful for us. And it's useful and tell us why it's useful for you, for you, in what ways. And we can start to sort of get a handle of it. So I just put that plea out there to everyone. Be in contact. I'm very happy to hear from people. So,
Randy, I love that everything you said. That last point I think is particularly important to ensure that the economic research and the applied research that is happening to better understand tribal economies, to understand the opportunities, understand the barriers, that they actually have legs, right? Like that it has utility. It can be accessible to a wide variety of different stakeholders and policymakers, and being able to package this complex research in ways that folks can talk about at the dinner table, I think is particularly important for understanding tribal economies. So I appreciate that. I'm looking at the time, and we're just about out of time. Unfortunately, I just, what an energizing discussion that we've had today, with deep insights into the economic impacts of tribal enterprises and economies. I want to sincerely thank our two panelists, Randy and Chelina, for sharing your insights with us today. Certainly want to thank the research teams behind the two research projects that Jacqui and Elliot had the opportunity to present on. Your collective experience and insights and observation are truly critical to understanding the diversity of economic development in Indian country and the broad effects that it has across this country. So I think with that, thank you very much for participating in today's webinar. And I hope you will join us for future CICD events. Lam lam spesia.